It's terrifying, honestly, because I don't know if this person, he knows who I was. He saw my face. So for all I know, he could be in my classes. I could see him in the streets. He could be watching me and he would recognize me and I would have no idea who he is.
Welcome to Higher Ed, ADL's podcast where once a month we sit down with Jewish students to uncover the truth about what's going on college campuses. I'm your host, Luda Saharov. Listen closely. This is all of our fight, and these are their stories. To say that Columbia University has been in the news lately would be an understatement. Shortly after we recorded this episode, the U.S. government pulled $400 million in grants and contracts from the institution, citing its failure to address internal anti-Semitism. And just 2 days later, federal immigration authorities arrested a former Columbia grad student and permanent resident who had been involved in extremist activities on campus. In this episode, I'm joined by Noah Lederman, a sophomore at Columbia University. We sat down for a conversation at ADL's Never Is Now Summit. Welcome back to Higher Ed. This is your host, Luda, and welcome, Noah. As many of you have seen, Columbia University is once again making headlines. And how fitting, because today we are recording from Never Is Now, the world's largest summit on hate and anti-Semitism in the world, right here in New York City. We're sitting in the Javits Center. There's over 4,000 people here gathered, and among them is someone who knows firsthand what it means to be a Jewish student on campus today. Noah, welcome to Higher Ed. Is this your first time at Never Is Now, and how does it feel to be here?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is my second time at Never Is Now. I was here last year, and I was really excited and looking forward the entire year to coming back. It was an incredible experience, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be here again.
Amazing. It's actually my first time at Never Is Now, so you have me beat, and I'm also very excited to be here. It's very surreal to be with this many people who are dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism. Tell me why you chose Columbia.
Well, honestly, Columbia was never really on my radar. It was always UCLA, UCLA, UCLA. That was the school I was told I was going to go to. That was the school I was told I wanted to go to.
Why?
My whole family went there. My grandparents went there. They taught there. It's just, we're a UCLA family, as my grandma says. It wasn't until my junior year that I discovered the joint program with the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I fell in love. I loved the idea of being able to pursue a secular education at Columbia while also continuing my Jewish studies at JTS. And it's actually funny because when I received all my college acceptances, everybody called me and they said, Noah, don't go to Berkeley. They're so anti-Semitic there. Go to Columbia. You'll be safe there. They like the Jews there. And Now we can see how that turned out. And I share that story as sort of a jokey way, but also to demonstrate that you never know how quickly things can turn.
Yeah, so you're from Orange County, right?
Yes.
So I'm from Oregon, West Coast, Best Coast.
West Coast, Best Coast.
I want to know what it was like going from sunny Orange County to moving to New York City. Tell me about arriving to Morningside Heights, right on the edge of Harlem. What was the culture shock like?
It was pretty extreme, especially my first winter. I frequently, even now, will still sometimes walk out of my dorm in a t-shirt because I forget that it's freezing cold outside, because in Orange County you can walk out in a t-shirt at any time of the year and it's pretty much you're fine. I grew up in a very insular Jewish community. I went to a Jewish day school, the same Jewish day school from kindergarten through 12th grade. And so suddenly I was in an entirely new community. I was in New York City. It was overwhelming. But I will say that I really appreciated having my small Jewish community at JTS while also having my larger, broader community at Columbia. And it felt great to have this sort of big and small groups.
And did you appreciate having better bagels? That's the one thing.
Oh, absolutely.
To the East Coast.
For
we
sure.
do not have good bagels.
No, we do not.
In the Northwest. Can you paint a picture of what your first few weeks were like at Columbia as a freshman? What were your first impressions of campus and the students?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to balance workload with social life, with all these new experiences and opportunities in New York City. But one of the main things that I was focused on was how do I balance my social life and my work life? Because in high school, it was always very, very simple. I had my same friends from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. Now I had new friends, and this was something that I needed to learn how to navigate. And at first it was challenging, but I found it really rewarding when I found that sort of sweet balance. Of course, that all changed, and life, I never really experienced normal college life because I was only in school for about a month before October 7th, and then everything changed.
Right. And I know you said you had those just 3 weeks on campus before October 7th, but what were some of the best moments or moments that you remember that were fun about freshman year?
Some of the best moments were during NSOP, which is the first week of school, New Student Orientation Programming week. And it was just so wonderful to get to meet so many people. And I think one of the highlights was actually getting to meet the Jewish community, being at Hillel, having my first Shabbat dinner, going to Chabad afterwards, and just meeting all this incredible Jewish community that came from all around the world and all around the country. It was really, really amazing.
Yeah, I remember my first Shabbat dinner and just like being around so many Jewish people your age and college for the first time.
And everyone has a story.
Exciting.
It's amazing. You get to ask everyone, where are you from? And they tell you just the craziest things.
Yeah, I remember that. And I honestly wish I could relive that first week of college again. It was so fun. So up until October 7th, it sounds like you were settling into college life. You were meeting people, exploring the city. Can you take me back to that day, October 7th? How did you first hear the news?
It was Simchas Torah, and I had been at Chabad earlier that day, and we had sort of migrated from the Chabad house to campus, and we'd gathered in a circle for Hakafot. And I remember somebody telling me that something had happened in Israel, and we didn't really know what yet. And I just heard bits and pieces, and nothing to really put it together, but I just knew something really bad was happening. And it was a very somber mood, and I just remember feeling an incredible sense of community and pride in my Jewish identity and in my Jewish community, my newfound Jewish community. I mean, these are people I just met maybe 2-3 weeks ago. Some of them I met for the first time that day. And yet I felt so at home in that moment that it was as if, despite feeling as if something terrible had happened, we didn't really know what, I felt that everything would be okay in that moment.
I'm so happy to hear that you had that, even as a freshman 1 month in, that you'd already found your Jewish community and found Chabad after that terrible day. I remember even being a senior 4 years in, it was still so lonely and so isolating and so important to have that community.
Because on October 8th, we had our first vigil, and I remember seeing every single Jewish person I'd ever seen on campus gathered together. It didn't matter what your political views were, what your religious views were, if you were conservative, reformed, Orthodox, if you were left-leaning, right-leaning, Democrat, Republican. Every single Jewish person I'd ever seen at any Shabbat dinner, at any Hillel event, any Chabad event, we were all together. And the strength in our community in being united was so powerful. It was as if there was a force field protecting us, and that force field was being fueled by our unity.
So in your classes and just in general on campus, how did the energy shift?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you were a senior. I can't imagine what it must have been like to have friends that you had for 4 years all of a sudden turn on you. I had the opposite experience. For me, it's all of a sudden I now have to think about whether or not the person sitting next to me in my classroom was one of the people that was in the encampment, that was wearing a keffiyeh, raging against my people in my homeland and chanting, "Go back to Europe," and "We don't want no Zionists here," and "Globalize the Intifada." So I felt on edge. And honestly, I actually didn't think anything would change. I thought, okay, the world has to see that this was a terrible event. Regardless of your views, Zionist or not Zionist, this won't change anything. How wrong was I? I remember sitting in one of my classrooms, and students who I considered friends, and we became friends in the first week of school, had seen me at a protest earlier that day with an Israeli flag, and I said, "Oh, hey, how are you?" And she just walked right past me. She didn't even look at me, put her head down, and just walked right past me. And when I saw her in class, I tried talking to her, and she just wouldn't engage with me. She had to peer review my essay, and she even made comments about my essay. I was writing about Judaism and a question about race and Judaism, and she said, "I disagree with your argument entirely, but your writing is fine." And it just felt very uncomfortable, and as if I could not be who I was.
I think it's very interesting that you share the freshman perspective. I hadn't even really thought about that before, and how, different it is to be on opposite sides of the college experience after October 7th.
But I do think there's something to be said about, as a freshman now, even now in my sophomore year, when I go into a classroom, I have to think to myself, is wearing a Magen David, which I do proudly, going to impact my grade? Is the professor going to make an assumption about my views? Are my peers going to make assumptions about my views?
Yeah, it's a very, very different reality for students now than it was just even 2 or 3 years ago. So, Noah, I want to take our listeners to a specific day, February 2nd, 2024. This is a few months after October 7th. Things have really heated up at Columbia by this point. What did you hear prior? What was going through your head that morning?
It started off a pretty normal day. It was a Friday morning, and there was a protest that was happening on campus. And so in some of the group chats, they were talking about trying to organize a counter-protest. By this point, it had become fairly common to have protests and counter-protests. And when I could go, I would always go to the counter-protests, even though some of my friends would say, oh, it's not productive. What are you going to do? You're not going to change their minds. Going to a counter-protest, for me, is about showing the Jewish community on campus and the world that we're still there. So that morning I woke up late and I made my way from my dorm to campus, and I found a small group that was holding a counter-protest within our lifetime protest that was occurring outside the gates of Columbia.
This Friday, so we're on the eve of Shabbat.
Yes.
Did you have class that day? Did you have homework?
Yeah, of course I always have homework, but no class that day. I remember that day I felt discouraged because we just had so many of these and it seemed like it would never end. And this would go on, of course, continue going on. It's going on now, still today. But I remember that day thinking, how many more of these do we have to go to? How many more of these is it going to take before the world sees that we're not in the wrong?
What were you wearing that day?
Generally, when I go to a counter-protest, I wear something related to my Jewish identity or my Zionist identity. I was wearing a shirt that said B'yachad Nanatzech, which is Together We Will Overcome. And it had also a blue and white flag and Israeli flag, but not exactly, and a sort of a peace stuff that was flying out of the colors of blue and white.
Did it make you nervous to wear that? I know that, a lot of the time I felt by my senior year very comfortable wearing Israeli Jewish clothing on campus, but, sometimes you're not in the mood to be perceived in that way.
No, actually, I've never felt nervous about that, even after October 7th, when there was an initial question of, what will my peers think if I wear it? It was never actually even a question for me. Never crossed my mind even. But no, I was not nervous, and I was proud to wear those kinds of shirts.
So you're joining a counter-protest. Paint a picture of what you were seeing, hearing, feeling.
So there was a very small number of us in the counter-protest. It was a small little pen that the NYPD had set up for us. At any given moment, maybe there were at most 15, 20 people in our pen. Within our lifetime protest, they were probably 10, 15 times larger than we were. They had filled the entire sidewalk for almost 2 blocks down. They even had sort of overflowed into the streets. The skies were gray. There were police on the loudspeakers telling protesters to get out of the streets or else they'll be arrested. And the protesters continued to sort of swarm the streets. And it seemed as if the NYPD had little to no control over the situation that was developing. And I can't explain how terrifying that felt, to feel as if there was nobody there that could or would protect us should things turn hostile.
Were you scared?
Yeah.
Were people around you scared? What were the conversations you were having at that time?
I mean, there had been, at the protest, there had been at least one arrest already, and this only emboldened them to be even angrier and even louder and even more aggressive. And so many of my fellow counter-protesters decided to leave. As it was getting closer to Shabbat, I started to pack up my things and go myself. And at that same time, the protest had decided to mobilize. So they started to move and march down the street.
Did you know how you were going to get out of there, or is this just something you didn't think about?
At this point, I had never thought that I would need an escape plan. I understood this as peaceful protest in the name of differing ideologies. This day was a turning point for me. Now, I don't go anywhere without a solid escape plan, a plan of action, and backup, so I know that I and my fellow Zionists are safe.
And I'm sorry you have to do that. That's really unfortunate. You should feel safe. But I'm also, happy to hear that you're doing that now. I think that's really important. I want you to tell me what happened when you tried to leave this protest.
So the protest ended when the Within Our Lifetime protesters decided to mobilize. So what that means is they would leave the bullpen that had been set up for them outside the gates, and they started marching. As soon as the protesters start to move, that's when we get out of there.
So what happens next?
So instead of going straight back to my dorm, I ducked into a bookstore to get a book for Shabbat. I didn't notice that the protesters had actually gone around the campus, so they started marching south on Broadway. And I lived north of the location of where the protest was happening. So I assumed I could go in the store, I could grab a book, and then walk north to my dorm without any issues running into them. There would be no concern. Little did I know they had actually walked around. So they had started walking south, and then they made a square, and they had gone down towards my dorm and then started walking north. So when I was walking from the bookstore to my dorm, all of a sudden I saw this mob of people approaching. And I remember thinking, oh, that's not good. And actually at this time, my friend, who had been in Long Island for the day, came to join me. And he was just wearing normal street clothes, maybe a Columbia sweatshirt. We didn't really say anything. We just thought, we'll just walk through. It's not the best idea to be in a situation where a protest has been mobilized, but we didn't think that anything would happen. Really, this is not arrogance, this is not hubris. I just didn't think that anybody would be physically violent. And of course, I was wrong. And the sun was setting, so I was in a little bit of a hurry. And as I was walking down the sidewalk, I saw the mob approaching. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to keep my head down and walk through. There was a sort of area of the sidewalk that was clear that I was able to walk through. However, one of the protesters who was wearing a keffiyeh and a backpack and had earlier been antagonizing and getting very close to us in our pen during the protest itself when they were stationary, with the camera getting very close in our faces, taking pictures of us. He noticed my shirts and recognized me, and he motioned for his fellow protesters to take the banner that they had and spread out across the sidewalk so as to block off the pathway that I was using to get through this mob of protesters.
How many protesters? When you say mob, how many people was that?
This was the group that covered enough service area to take up the entire sidewalk for about 2 blocks from the Columbia Gates to the end of Columbia's campus.
Well, at least several hundred people.
Yes, it was one of the biggest protests to this day that I've actually ever seen. And it was pretty terrifying because I realized at that moment they'd identified me. And I thought, well, okay, I'll just keep my head down and they're going to walk past me. I'm going to get through. It's sort of like a salmon swimming upstream, but I can do it. So I moved closer to the wall and just sort of started walking along the wall. And this, of course, didn't work for the man who had spotted my shirt. He made his way towards me and he used his body and his backpack to physically pin me up against the wall and immobilize me. I struggled, and after a moment I was able to break free. At this point I didn't care where I was going. I just started running south on Broadway. He started running after me and yelled, "Keep running, keep effing running." In the moment, by the way, when I was pinned up against the wall, I didn't know if he had a knife, if he had a gun. I had no idea what was about to happen, and all I could think in that moment was, oh my God, my family is going to see that I was stabbed on the news, and they're going to find out. That's what they're going to find out. And I only stopped when I got a couple hundred feet away when I stopped by these 2 NYPD officers. And I was shaken. I was visibly very disturbed, and I was anxious. I didn't know what to do.
I want to focus in on this moment. The people who are holding up this banner to block the road. Can you see their faces?
No, and the person who pinned me up against the wall, all of them, they had their faces covered, and all I could see were his eyes. But there was such hate in his eyes. It was genuinely one of the most terrifying experiences I've had to date, to just see nothing but his eyes looking at me, glaring.
What was your friend's reaction? Where was your friend at that time?
There were so many protesters that they had come between us and we got separated as this was happening. So we were walking next to each other, but as soon as the masked individual saw my shirt and they blocked off the sidewalk, he pinned me up against the wall, and my friend couldn't get to me because there were people in between us. So he was trying to get to me, but he just couldn't get through the people. There was just so many people.
And at that point, you go over to a group of police officers. These are NYPD officers or campus police?
NYPD officers. And the only reason that he stopped pursuing me is because he saw that I had made it to NYPD officers.
So he was literally chasing you.
Yes, he was chasing me.
So you come up to these officers, and what do you say to them exactly?
I didn't say anything to him at this point. I was very shaken, and I just didn't know what to do. I just wanted to get back to...
Did they ask if you were okay?
All they said was, "You're blocking my view," is what she said to me. And I commented to my friend, well, she obviously didn't have a very clear view of what just happened, or I hope she didn't. Otherwise, if she didn't step in, that's concerning. But the fact of the matter is that these were 2 officers who were there to keep the peace, and they had failed to do that. And when you see somebody chasing another person and then they stop, when you get to the 2 officers, it was shocking to me that they didn't even think to ask, what happened? What's going on? Is everything okay?
Wow. I mean, that's a lot, and I'm appalled that public safety officials who have so much power and who witnessed this happen had nothing to say to you other than get out of the way?
Well, Luda, it gets worse than that, actually. On Sunday, I consulted various individuals, the ADL, would stand with us, and they encouraged me to file a police report. But first, I reported to public safety, which is the campus security. And so the public safety officer told me, he said, I would like to offer you some advice. When tensions are so high, maybe you shouldn't wear clothing that identifies you. And he also prefaced this by saying that he doesn't know what's going on. I don't know what all this is about. And this was one of the higher ranking officers. And I said, I think it's concerning that after, this is February now, so after a few months of protests, you haven't thought to look into what's going on, if not only so you can better protect your students and recognize the calls and chants for what they are. You know what intifada means. Otherwise, you may just think they're saying words. However, I would like to share with you, as I said, I'd like to share with you that my ancestors were forced to wear identification, showing that they were Jewish. For me, it's a point of pride. It's something that I take on, and I am fiercely and proudly Jewish in honor of their memory.
So, in this situation, clearly you were the victim, or you feel like you were the victim. You were pushed up against the wall at this protest. You were made to feel very unsafe. NYPD was not helpful in that moment. And now a high-ranking campus safety official is telling you that maybe you should not be going there. Did that make you feel like they saw you as the problem instead of the victim?
Yeah, this was a watershed moment for me where I realized a few things. Number one, I needed to always assume the worst whenever going to a protest or a counter-protest. Number two, I cannot rely on the individuals that I've been told my entire life that I can rely on to protect me. And that was a very scary realization, because you're told from a very young age, the people that are there to protect you are police officers, public safety officers, the people that, you're told they are here to protect you, to keep the peace and to ensure safety. And yet they opted to blame me and say the solution to this hateful act is for you to change your actions. And this is just demonstrative, by the way, of the overall policies of universities such as Columbia and Barnard. But when the school when they shut down in the spring after the takeover of Hamilton Hall, which everyone saw on the news, I actually viewed this not as commendable, but as the university saying, we are shutting down the school and telling Jewish students to stay away because we can't or won't protect them. And they are more inclined to just say, we don't want to have the problem, so just Jewish students don't be here. Don't show that you're Jewish. Don't show that you're Zionist. It's easier for us.
By the way, we had this almost same exact situation. No one was assaulted, thank God. We had a very similar situation at the University of Oregon where students had trouble getting out of a building where there was a die-in, and the general counsel at the university said it's best if those who are traumatized avoid the area during these type of events. And what's interesting to me, and I want to hear your reaction to this, is this whole debate around universities enforcing policies and enforcing safety at these protests. The whole debate is around the idea of free speech. Do you think that you have free speech and the ability to express yourself freely and safely at those protests?
I take it upon myself to exercise that right to free speech. I am unapologetically Jewish. I'm unapologetically Zionist. But I'm no longer confident that universities will protect that right for me. I am no longer confident after the events of since October 7th that this is a guaranteed right for me in the same way that it is for other groups. And in many cases, even in the most severe cases, such as the takeover of Hamilton Hall, there were no meaningful consequences for these protesters, whatever you want to call them, who engaged in the disruptive activity of campus. And this to me means that free speech is a right to every student on campus, but only certain kinds of free speech, and it's beginning to be limited. You can say what you want, but maybe you shouldn't wear a Jewish star. You can wear what you want, but maybe you shouldn't wear a shirt that says Israel. And this is just appalling to me. I can't even believe it.
I want to talk about the masking element because it's very interesting to me. The Anti-Defamation League, ADLs, actually has a national campaign right now called Unmask Hate that was actually launched in New York, and I'm personally working on it in Maryland. And I want to unpack the aspect of the mask of the keffiyeh and how that contributed to your incident. The person who assaulted you, you said, they had their entire face covered except for their eyes. Do you think the mask was in a way used to intimidate you?
For sure. And it's more than that. I think it's about intimidation, and that's a major component. But I also think that the masking element is what enables these individuals to act in the ways that they do. For me, I've often said that I have no reason to wear a mask or hide my identity because I am proud of everything that I say. And I've said to individuals who I've spoken to who wear keffiyehs or masks, I say to them, if you feel the need to cover your face and you feel the need to hide your identity, maybe you should reevaluate the things that you're saying and consider why it is that you're so ashamed. You should be proud of everything you say, which is why the whole idea of doxing, well, doxing is terrible. I've often said that for me, if you want to take a video of me or a picture of me saying something, gladly, just send it to me, please. I'll add it to my website. I feel that wearing masks is an element of sort of, you see it in literature all the time, it's this idea of when you hide your identity, you're able to begin this descent into almost savage behavior.
Yeah, I've heard this from protesters before where they say the reason that they're wearing the masks, the keffiyehs that cover their entire faces, or the N95s even at protests, is because they don't want their speech to be limited. But at a certain extent, actions, for example, assaulting someone, should have consequences. And so do you have any idea who the person who pushed you up against the wall was? And was there any way for you to tell if they were a Columbia student or just like a random New Yorker?
No, I have no idea. Honestly, I don't think it matters so much because it could have been a Columbia student. And if it ever comes out that it was a Columbia student, that would be unfortunately not surprising. And again, how can we expect Jewish students to sit in class side by side with their non-Jewish, non-Zionist classmates when there's the thought that these students would feel comfortable assaulting a student because of their identity, their Jewish identity, their Zionist beliefs?
And how does it make you feel knowing that you don't and likely will never know the identity of the person who attacked you?
It's terrifying, honestly, because I don't know if this person, he knows who I was. He saw my face. So for all I know, he could be in my classes. I could see him in the streets. He could be watching me and he would recognize me and I would have no idea who he is. And that's one of the most terrifying elements, by the way, about everything that's happened since October 7th. These are otherwise highly intelligent individuals. I mean, there's a dissonance that I experience when I'm in class and I hear a student give a tremendously brilliant literary analysis of some passages on the board. And then an hour later, I see that at a protest in a keffiyeh saying things like globalize the intifada and saying things such as Israel didn't exist before 1948 and the Jews never lived there. And I think to myself, how is it possible that people who express such intelligence and such understanding of certain areas of academic life can be so ignorant? And it's just so jarring for me. So it terrifies me that I don't know who this guy is, because it also means it could happen again. He knows who I am. I don't know who he is. It puts me at a disadvantage, and I don't like that.
I don't like it either.
No.
And I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm glad you brought that up because I also always wonder that. Like, we've seen some of the worst incidents of anti-Semitism at these protests at Ivy League universities. Mm-hmm. You know, Columbia, Brown, Cornell. And I wonder, like, I remember applying to college. I know it was very hard to get in, and I agree, these are highly intelligent people. And so it's really interesting to hear you reflect on that.
People often say, oh, they're stupid. No, they're not stupid. And that's the scariest part. They're not stupid. If they were stupid, I could almost be more okay with it. But they've demonstrated an ability to think critically in other areas of their life. It's just when it comes to the Jews, they're unwilling to. So this, to me, belies a deeper Judeophobia and anti-Semitism rather than ignorance.
And I know that this is something we could unpack for the next hour, but I want to talk about the emotional and psychological impact of this incident on you. So in the hours, the immediate hours and the days after this happened, how are you feeling? Did it change the way that you were moving through campus and through the city?
Yes and no. If you're asking whether or not I tucked in my Magen David, stopped wearing Israel shirts, the answer is no, absolutely not. In fact, my friends call me antagonistic, and I object to that. Well, I can be, but I object to the idea that me wearing a shirt that says Israel, or has a Jewish star on it, or has an Israeli flag on it is antagonistic. Why is the onus on me to have to mitigate and adjust and hide my beliefs? However, as I mentioned earlier, it was an awakening for me. I realized just how bad it was. Like I told you, I mean, maybe it's ignorant, and I'll acknowledge this, but I did not ever think that something like this would happen. I was so shocked that somebody decided to get physically violent because to me it was still about, of course, it was never just about the ideology. It was never really a respectful, civil conversation, social discourse. It was always about anti-Semitism, but I was just so shocked at how far it had gone.
Did this moment shift how you felt safe at Columbia and your everyday routine?
Yeah. It was at this moment that I realized Jewish students were not safe at Columbia University. And I later wrote an op-ed for Haaretz, which was titled, "Are Jewish Students Safe at Columbia University?" And this was after the encampment. And it was almost as if each thing that happened in the spring semester of my freshman year was just so unimaginably insane. The escalation was exponential. I mean, I was attacked in February. Then you had the encampment, and I was, okay, it can't get crazier than that. Then the building was taken over. It can't get crazier than that. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse, which, by the way, we can discuss this later, but one of the hardest questions I get is, are things better this year? The answer is no. Things are not better this year. It's so sad that when you ask some of my friends, they say, oh yeah, it's better. I say, why do you say that? They say, because there's less protests. So, okay, we've gone from taking over buildings to just holding protests with keffiyehs and glorifying the martyrs of Hamas militants on the lawn once a week. This is what we call better? This is what we call a good campus environment? No.
How did you tell your parents this happened? My mom would have killed me if I called her and told her this happened, for even showing up to this and putting myself in that position. What was the response of your parents?
Like I said, in that moment, I was genuinely terrified that my parents were going to find out what happened from watching the news. And all I could think was, I am so grateful that I get the chance to call them and tell them that this happened, rather than finding out from some other way or from a friend or from the university, having to tell them that something terrible had happened to me. They were frustrated. I mean, they were relieved that I was okay. But the response I got initially was, like you said, your mom would likely say, why were you there? What were you thinking wearing an Israeli flag shirt, walking to your dorm? What were you thinking? Why would you do this? And my response to them was, why not? I still could not understand why I was expected to change what I was wearing, because there were individuals out there who felt that they had a right to be physically violent in response to my beliefs, my religious beliefs, my political beliefs.
At some point, things got so bad on your campus that your Hillel rabbi sent out an email to students. It deeply pains me to say that I would strongly recommend you return home as soon as possible and remain home until the reality in and around campus has dramatically improved. And to be honest, when I saw this email, I couldn't understand how it could be so bad that your Hillel rabbi would be telling you to go home, that they could no longer protect you. But hearing you tell this story back, I'm like, wow, this finally makes sense to me. What was your first reaction when you read that? And did you think you'd ever hear something like that from a campus rabbi?
No, I had been with Rav Eli in D.C. the day of the congressional hearing when President Shafiq, the president of Columbia University, was being questioned by Congresswoman Stefanik. And we got back, and that was the day the encampment went up. So when we got back on the bus from D.C., Rav Eli, the rabbi who sent out the text, we were together, and the encampment went up, and there were protests in the streets, flares, flags were being burned. And even then, we were unsure of what to do. But even then, he didn't feel the need to say, guys, we're not safe. So when he sent that message out and said, students, go home, to me, it really belied the severity of the situation. And he was right. Jewish students were not safe. The university was, again, either unable or unwilling to protect its Jewish students. So I think that I never expected to hear a rabbi tell us to go home. I never expected a rabbi to say, we can't protect you. And that was another moment for me where I realized just how severe the situation was.
So I'm graduated now, but I'm still very close to this. I have a sister who's a senior in high school, and she's currently getting her college acceptances and trying to decide. Really? So maybe they should connect.
So last year she was a junior and she was applying to colleges, and she called me, I remember one day, and she asked me, Noah, will I be safe at Barnard? And it broke my heart that my little sister, in addition to having to worry about the SATs, ACTs, GPA, extracurriculars, all of this stuff that is so stressful, she now had to add to her list, will I be safe because I'm Jewish? And it broke my heart to hear my sister and many of her friends, they called me up and they said, will I be safe at XYZ school?
What do you want Jewish students, especially those just starting college, to know?
First of all, I don't judge anyone for their actions. If you feel that you need to leave university and transfer schools, I respect that decision. If you ask me for my advice, I say, this should not be a factor in where you go to college, because if you decide to not go to a school because of the protests, what you're saying is that you're abandoning your Jewish brothers and sisters that are there, and you're saying you guys are on your own. So I think it depends on the person, but I also believe that if we leave and we stop going to these schools, we let them win. This is what they want. Why do we need to adjust our life decisions and our goals because there's hateful activity?
Noah, I couldn't agree more on that. I always told students who came to me the only way to fight darkness is by sharing light and by being prouder to be a Jew.
Yes. Be fiercely Jewish. Be proud of your Jewish identity. Never hide. That's what I say. But I added to that, by the way, after February, I used to always say that. I added be safe. And that's not something I ever needed to say before. But after February 2nd, I realized that I needed to add the condition of be safe.
And I appreciate you adding that, because safety, both emotional and physical safety, I think is always of the utmost importance. You know this. You're just 18 years old coming in at college. You moved all the way across the country for the first time. And so many students are doing the same. And you need to protect your peace and you need to be safe. And so I appreciate that you added that, because I always want students to be proud Jews. Like, first and foremost, you need to take care of you. You need to get A's in your classes. Be a student, first and foremost, before having to show up and fight for our people. This podcast, as you know, it's called Higher Ed. Chai is so much part of your story from how I'm hearing it. What does the word Chai mean to you in the context of your campus experience?
The fact that you see so many Jews wearing Chai necklaces, or you see even some of my friends have Chai tattooed on their thighs or on their arms. Chai is such a central value to the Jewish tradition, to the Jewish people. Chai is life, and it's so sacred to us, which is why it was so upsetting to me when I was on campus and I saw these protesters claiming that we have a complete disregard for human life. Because in Jewish tradition, life is sacred. It is so core to who we are, and yet we were being accused of the exact opposite. And so what it means to me is two things. One, it means that we need to continue to remind everyone of how sacred this value is to us, of Chai, of life, but also it means to me that you must live the life that you want to live. You can't let others dictate how you live your life. To me, Chai, in its fullest sense, means being who you want to be, being who you are, your truest self. And that means not succumbing, not giving in to fear, to social pressure. And don't get me wrong, it's difficult. You asked about a freshman.
Oh, I know.
It's, of course.
I've been there.
And as a freshman, you just want to make friends. How do you decide between doing what's the basic human need of being social and having friends in college and being proud of your identity? And so my advice, my thing there is Chai to me means being your truest self, whatever that means.
That's beautiful. Amen, amen, amen. So what gives you hope? What are you most excited about right now?
I mean, my honest answer as to what gives me hope is initiatives like this. I think seeing someone such as yourself who went through as a senior, you mentioned that you had friends stop talking to you, peers that you had for 4 years, and yet you still committed your professional life to doing this and to Jewish advocacy. That's what gives me hope. What gives me hope is seeing the Jewish community continue to show up. We have gone through the unimaginable as a people historically, yet we're still here. So what gives me hope is that in spite of all the darkness, as you mentioned, there is always some light, and I see the light of the Jewish people as at a point it seemed as if it was dimming, and now is growing stronger, and that gives me hope. And as for what I'm excited for is I'm excited to see what happens next. I think that we have awakened in many people a desire to be more proud of their Jewish identity, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this manifests in my sister's sort of year, who's going to come in after October 7th, and then my brother who's 15, and seeing how the subsequent generations are going to be proud of their Jewish identity.
So a little good luck message to both of our sisters.
Yes.
We're going to college next year. Good luck. Be loud and proud Jews, and your siblings are here to support you. And
Yep.
the entire Jewish
Absolutely.
community. Special shout out to our sisters. Again, I'm so sorry for what you went through, but I'm also so grateful that you had the koach, you had the strength to go through that, come out better. I heard earlier that you have 3 majors, so clearly you're still thriving in your academics despite everything you went through. And I just want to say, I'm proud of you. I'm grateful to know you. We're going to stay connected. And thank you for coming on Higher Ed and sharing your story.
Luda, thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor to get to share my story, share my perspectives. And this experience, well, of course, upsetting, it strengthened my conviction. And in a way, I feel as if my true calling has always been advocating for the Jewish people. And I'm so grateful to you for allowing me to continue to share my opinions and voice my thoughts. So thank you. Luda, thank you so much for having me on here. It's a true honor.
That's it for this episode of Higher Ed. Thanks so much for listening. To learn more about how to fight anti-Semitism on your campus, go to notoleranceforantisemitism.adl.org. If you or someone else you know would like to report a campus anti-Semitism incident, text call help, all one word, to 51555 or go to adl.org/call for free legal help. Subscribe today for weekly conversations and stories about Jewish campus life. Please rate and review us, and if you have an experience to share, email us at highered@adl.org. That's CHAIERED@adl.org. We look forward to hearing your stories. This episode was produced by Jasmine Rach. Senior producer is Russell Gragg. Executive producer, Dovi. I'm your host, Luda Saharov, and this is Higher Ed.